In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read ancient tomes, the order of the Abercast. We are the brave and bold.
The Ages begins with the shocking story of Cain and Abel and the journey of violence and revenge spanning thousands of years, following Cain through his cursed life from an ancient invasion of malicious angels to the American Revolutionary War. A masterful, compelling journey through time, The Ages delves deep into arcane knowledge, myth, and legend. The art is stunning, and the story takes you on a journey where mortals, immortals, angels, and demons are all forced to deal with the folly that is God's creation. It's a beautifully dark and gritty ride through history. This 4-part story follows the astrological procession of the ages and how each 2,500-year age parallels major changes in the development of Earth's inhabitants. Cain's blasphemous struggle with the divine and sacred tyrant God will create and crumble empires, shape history, and cause a cosmic cataclysm.
The Abercast. Occult. History. Conspiracy. Violence.
Welcome to the Abercast. I'm John. Take a couple seconds here to encourage everyone to rate and review on iTunes. Check out the Patreon, somebody please. And check out the website, stigmatastudios.com or abercast.com. At the bottom, there are links to all the social media, all my social medias. I'd like to hear from you guys. So please hit me up with any kind of questions or whatever. Comments, etc. And we got a big show tonight. So this is a topic that keeps boomeranging back in my direction, and as it does so, I am forced over and over again to re-examine it and to look at it. We've done numerous episodes on this. Officially starting way back at the beginning, I did an episode called Those Who Weep for Tammuz, which did not survive moving day. But when I did my last episode about Tammuz, which was Tammuz, dying and rising God, ? I did put the earlier Tammuz episode, the first Tammuz episode, on as a bonus after the show ended. So all that is out there. But also, like, you know, we talk about Tammuz, we're talking about Semiramis, and we're talking about Nimrod. So I have to point people back to, I did a stretch of episodes about post diluvian life. So I did like all the Garden of Eden stuff, and then like I kind of cut the flood out because the flood's a big topic, and we're actually going to wind up doing a whole series on it, I imagine. But I did a whole kind of thing like directly after the flood, starting in the lines of Cain's episode, I think. But also there's an episode about Nimrod and the Tower of Babel. And there was an episode right after that called, what the fuck was it called? I don't remember. It was called World War Zero and Adam's Magic Underpants. That's what it was called. So we start talking about these, we start talking about these ancient, Babylonian myths. And we get to this, we did a lot of what I would think seems like debunking. So, Zeitgeist came out, and at the beginning of Zeitgeist, they'd cribbed a whole bunch of like this guy Jordan Maxwell's stuff, basically his material. And, in there, they do like a list of these proto-Christ figures. And at the end of the last Tammuz dying and rising God episode, we were kind of showing, we rested on this idea that the idea of the resurrection might have been a late inclusion in these myths, because when you dig into these myths, a lot of them, like the myth of Tammuz, from these different sources that I was reading from, has him dying, but he never returns. As a matter of fact, in one case, he refused to return. On the other cases, he just wasn't allowed to return. And then in, I think, another one, he was like, yeah, I'll come back someday. So I thought that I was going to be done with Tammuz, at least for a little while. But I was in my reading, I found this book called The Two Babylons, or the Papal Worship, proved to be the worship of Nimrod and his wife. This book seems like it would be in all the all the new age shops like nowadays, but this was written in 1916 by Alexander Hislop. I think that's the way that's the way I'm pronouncing it. So I started getting in this book a little bit, and I realized that this book it has many gears to it, and has tons of they'll just put the footnotes in the middle of these the footnotes and the references in the middle of these pages, so it becomes a tiresome read. So I thought that if you guys would give me the steering wheel for a little bit, I will navigate through the first part of this book for you. So this is going to wind up being a thing for us. We're going to be working on this book for a little while, but I thought we'd start out strong at the beginning. And one of the kind of gears this book rides in, it seems like a mountain bike to me. Like in some cases, they'll be talking about Tammuz as Bacchus. And you're like, oh, okay, so this is like a Jesus Christ kind of thing. And then they'll shift gears and talk about Nimrod as becoming a god, as becoming capital G, God, and Semiramis becoming like a stand-in for the Holy Spirit. So I thought that this is just a different take on it. Like if you listen to Those Who Weep for Tammuz at the end of the Tammuz dying or rising God episode, you'll see that I actually moved quite a ways away from that original episode to the later one. And it might have caused a little bit of confusion if you're listening to it, but I think that I did make it quite clear. So this is just kind of like the next layer of the onion for me. And it's not specifically Tammuz being a proto-Christ. It's, and like when you listen to that Tower of Babel episode, it's, there's speculation and there's text backing it up, quote, unquote, backing it up about Nimrod doing weird rituals and things to himself to make him into like a giant. That's all wild stuff. It's all wild stuff, but it's fun stuff that's where we live in this fun stuff. So I thought that I'd just take this opportunity this week to really just tackle and get into the first part of this book. So we're going to, after we mix up our jihads, everybody. Go ahead and mix up your jihad now. And you can join us at the beep. Beep. The two Babylons, or the Papal worship, proved to be the worship of Nimrod and his wife. 1916, Alexander Hislop. We're going to skip into it. We're going to skip down into Chapter 2, Section 2, Subsection 1. I told you this book is a chore. The child in Assyria. The original of that mother so widely worshipped, there is a reason to believe, was Semiramis, already referred to, who it is well known was worshipped by the Babylonians and the other eastern nations, and that under the name of Rhea, the great goddess mother. It was from the sun, however, that she was derived all her glory and her claims of deification. That son, though represented as a child in his mother's arms, was a person of great stature and immense bodily power, as well as the most fascinating manners. In Scripture, he is referred to in Ezekiel 8:14 under the name Tammuz, but he is commonly known among classical writers under the name of Bacchus, that is, the lamented one. Let's see here. While we're diving into this, also want to bring up the Harpocrates episodes. We did a couple episodes on Freemason, the Goat Riders, the Masonic Goat Riders, and also Harpocrates, the Rise of Harpocrates, I think I called it, where we talk about, and it's going to come into context, so I wanted to bring it up. Like, it's he's an aspect of Horus who is, it's like his rejuvenated kind of form. He Crowley talks about it too as Harkuit, but he's talking about Harpocrates. He's this child version of Horus. And so we're going to see in the same way a little bit of shade of how this Tammuz character is also in some way a brand new car smell version of Nimrod. The ordinary reader, the name Bacchus suggests nothing more than revelry and drunkenness. Here. But it is now well known that amid all the abominations that attended his orgies, their grand design were professedly the purification of souls, and that from the guilt and defilement of sin, this lamented one, exhibited and adored as a little child in his mother's arms, seems in point of fact to have been the husband of Semiramis, whose name is Ninnius, by which he is commonly known as classical history, literally signified, quote, the sun, unquote, as Semiramis' the wife was worshipped as Rhea, whose grand distinguishing character was that of the greater goddess, quote, mother, unquote. The conjunction with her husband under the name Ninnius, or the sun, was sufficient to originate the peculiar worship of mother and son. so extensively diffused among the nations of antiquity, and this, no doubt, is the explanation of the fact which has so much puzzled the inquirers into ancient history that Ninnius is sometimes called the husband and sometimes called the son of Semiramis. What, does this sound familiar? This is also the accounts of the origins of the same confusion of relationship between Isis and Osiris, the mother and the child of the Egyptians. For as Bunsen shows, Osiris was represented in Egypt as once the son and the husband of the mother, and actually bore as one of the titles of dignity and honor the named husband of the mother. This still further casts light onto the fact already noticed that the Indian god Aswara is represented as a babe in the breast of his own wife Isis, or Parvati. Now, this Ninnius, or son, born in the arms of the Babylonian Madonna, is so described very clearly to identify him with Nimrod. All fairness, this is in all fairness, all cards on the table. This book, it was published in 1916, has come under attack by academics since then about this specific point, that that Ninnius is another name for Nimrod. However, I'm going to continue. Ninnius, the king of the Assyrians, says Trogus Pompeius, epitomized by Justin, quote, first of all changed and contented moderation of the ancient manners incited by a new passion, the desire of conquest. He was the first who carried war against his neighbors, and he conquered all nations from Assyria to Libya, as they were yet unacquainted with the arts of war, unquote. Okay, so I don't, without seeing the whole thing, it's hard for me to quantify this, because we want to start Nimrod's story out at the Tower of Babel. He's building the Tower of Babel. He's trying to get the God to create a war on God in heaven and the angels, and he's shooting arrows up into the sky, and they're coming down with blood and all this stuff. But after the confoundment, after the curse of Babel, where God came down, he was like, you motherfuckers. And he was like, I can't believe so many of you lived. And if I can't kill you, I'm going to make you kill yourself, basically. That's the way that I take the story. So he confounds men's language and divides them against themselves. And so the later story is Nimrod as one of the kings in the War of the Nine Kings. I go into a lot of this stuff in my graphic novel, The Ages, if you guys are interested in my kind of fictionalized take of all this stuff. Anyhow, so, we see Nimrod. Now, for people that didn't listen to the older episodes, and people are like, why does he keep saying Nimrod? Nimrod is a great hunter. His name only became a joke after Bugs Bunny insulted Elmer Fudd by calling him Nimrod. Like, that's why it's funny to us. But before 1933 or whenever Bugs said that, Nimrod, it was known as a great hunter, and that's why he called Elmer Nimrod. Anyhow, this account points directly to Nimrod and can apply to no other. The account of Diodorus Siculus entirely agrees with it and adds another trait that goes still further to determine the identity. That account is as follows, quote, Ninnius, the most ancient of the Assyrian kings, mentioned in history, performed great actions, being naturally of a warlike disposition and ambitious of glory. The results from valor, he armed considerable numbers of young men that were brave and vigorous like himself, trained them up a long time in laborious exercises and hardships, and by that means accustom them to be near the fatigues of war, and to face dangers with intrepidity, as Diodorus makes Ninnius, quote, the most ancient of the Assyrian kings, unquote, and represents him beginning those wars which raised his power to extraordinary heights by bringing his people of Babylonia under subjection to him, while as yet the city of Babylon was not in existence. This shows that he occupied the very position of Nimrod, of whom the scripture accounts is the first began to be mighty on earth, and that the beginning of his kingdom was Babylon, as the Babel builders, when their speech were confounded, were scattered abroad the face of the earth, and therefore deserted both the city and the tower which they had commenced to build. Babylon as a city could not properly be said to exist until Nimrod, by establishing his power there, made it the foundation and the starting point of his greatness. With this respect, then the story of Ninnius and Nimrod exactly harmonize. The way to which Ninnius gained his powers is the very way in which Nimrod erected his. There can be no doubt that it is one by injuring his followers and the toils and dangers of the chase that he gradually formed them to the use of arms, and so prepared them for aiding him in his establishing his dominions, just as Ninnius, by training his companions for a long time in a laborious exercises and hardships, qualified them for making him into the first of the Assyrian kings. Okay, so are we now on board? This guy, Hislop, thinks he's arguing his ass off that Ninnius and Nimrod are the same guys. So whether you believe that or not, whether you believe the critics or not, just take your hands off the wheel, my friend, and let me steer you. Let me steer the ride. I'm good at it. I'm a good driver. Okay, so the book goes on to say, and this is going to be him more, just a quick bit of more of him qualifying this. Now, Hermes was the great original prophet of idolatry, for he was recognized by the pagans as the author of their religious rites and interpreter of the gods. The distinguished geniuses identified him with the Babylonian Nebu, which is interesting because I live right near Mount Nebu. Nebo, they call it, in Pittsburgh, they call it Nebo. So I'll call it Nebo too. The distinguished genius, it's not geniuses, but that's what my mind keeps making it. Jessianuses identified him with the Babylonian Nebo as a prophetic god, and the statement of Hyginus shows that he was known as the grand agent in the movement which produced the division of tongues. His words are these, quote, "For many ages men lived under the government of Yov." That's Yehovah of the Hebrews, with cities and without cities and without laws, and all speaking one language. But after that, Mercury interpreted the speech of men, and the same individual distributed the nations. Then discord began. Here is the manifest enigma. How could Mercury or Hermes have any need to interpret the speeches of mankind when they all spoke the same language? We're going to skip ahead here. Proceeding then on the deductions, it is not difficult to see how it might be said that Bel or Belius, the father of Ninnius, founded Babylon, while nevertheless Ninnius or Nimrod was properly the builder of it. But when we look at what is said of Semiramis, the wife of Ninnius, the evidence receives an additional development. That evidence goes conclusively to show that the wife of Ninnius could be none other than the wife of Nimrod, and further to bring out one of the grand characters in which Nimrod was deified, was adored. In Daniel 11:38, we read of a god called Allah Mahozi, the Lord, the God of fortifications. All right, so at this point in the argument, Nimrod is Ninnius, which makes Semiramis Nimrod's wife. And Nimrod is now the god of fortifications because of this tower. Who this god of fortifications could be, commentators have found themselves at a loss to determine. But the existence of a goddess of fortifications, everyone knows that there is the amplest evidence. And this is the goddess Cybele, who is universally represented with a mural or turreted crown, or with fortifications on her head. Why was Rhea or Cybele thus represented? Ovid asked the question and answers it himself and this is the answer. The reason he says why the statue of Cybele wore a crown of towers was, quote, because she first erected them in cities, unquote. The first city was in the world after the flood, from whence the commencement of the world itself was often dated, that had towers on encompassing walls, was Babylon, and Ovid himself tells us that it was Semiramis, the first queen of the city, who was believed to have surrounded Babylon with a wall of brick. Semiramis then was first deified queen of that city and the tower, whose top was intended to reach the heaven. Must have been a prototype of the goddess who, quote, first made towers and cities, unquote. When we look at the Ephesian Diana, we find evidence of the same effect. In general, Diana was depicted as a virgin. Sound familiar? And the patroness of virginity. But the Ephesian Diana was quite different. She was represented with all the attributes of the mother of the gods, and as the mother of the gods, she wore a turreted crown. Now, this tower bearing Diana is expressly identified with Semiramis. It goes on more. He's driving his point home. Cybele, the tower crown goddess, was just the female counterpart of the deity presiding over bulwarks or fortresses, and that his deity was Ninnius or Nimrod. We have still further evidence from what the scattered notices of antiquity say of the first deified king of Babylon under the name that identifies him as his husband Rhea, the tower-bearing goddess. That name is Kronos or Saturn. So you're going to be like, wait, now he's Kronos or Saturn? Okay, so the idea that he's working up to, I'm sure it's obvious to some of you already, is that these people were in some sort of effect historical figures. And after the confoundment of language, everyone split and went to their own like little corner of the Levant or wherever. And they held the same gods, but they had different names for them because their language was fucked up, right? So Ninnius becomes Nimrod. Nimrod becomes Kronos. Semiramis becomes Rhea. So that's, I guess I'm just showing my hand. That's kind of what's going on. So in the Greek mythology, Kronos and Rhea are commonly brother and sister. Nennius and Semiramis, according to history, are not represented as standing in for such relations to one another, but this is an objection to the real identity of Nennius and Kronos. For first, the relationship of the divinities in most countries are peculiarly conflicting. Osiris in Egypt is represented, but at different times, not only as the son and the husband of Isis, but also as her father and brother. Then, secondly, whatever the deified mortals might be before deification, on being deified, they came to new relationships, the apotheosis of husband and wife. It is necessary for the dignity of both that they both alike should be representative as the same celestial origin, but both supernaturally the children of God. Before the flood, this great sin that brought ruin on the human race was the sons of God married others than the daughters of God. In other words, those who were not spiritually their sisters. And what he's talking about is he's talking about the Nephilim. We did a couple episodes about all of that nonsense. This is going to be a big related topics tab, I think. It is well known that Cronus or Saturn was Rhea's husband, but it is not so well known who was Kronos himself. Traced back to his original, the divinity is proved to have been the first king of Babylon. Hollywood, Babylon. Who came along for the ride? It shows that Nennius, the first king of Babylon, was Kronos, but further we find that Kronos was the king of the Cyclops, who were his brethren and who derived that name from him, and that the Cyclops were known as the inventors of tower building. Now we see this, on Ancient Aliens and all this shit, when they look at the cyclopean masonry and stuff. I think they got it. I guess maybe they didn't get it from Lovecraft, but Lovecraft used this terminology a lot. And the idea was the Cyclops were giants, and only they could build walls using these gigantic stones or bricks or whatever. Hey, if you guys like Ancient Aliens or you're a proponent of the Ancient Aliens theory, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to call it bullshit. Are we still friends? Can we still be friends? The king of the Cyclops, quote, the inventors of the tower building, occupied a position exactly correspondent to that of Rhea, who first erected the towers and cities. If therefore Rhea, the wife of Kronos, was the goddess of fortification, Kronos or Saturn, the husband of Rhea, that is Nennius or Nimrod, is the first king of Babylon, must have been Allah Mazohene, the god of fortifications. All right. We're almost done with this part. The name Kronos itself goes not a little to confirm the argument. Kronos signified... Ooh, here we go. I'm going to put a pin in this, and we're going to come back right after this. I hope you guys are enjoying this. What do you think of it so far? I'd like to know. Hit me up. The name Kronos itself goes not a little to confirm the argument. Kronos signifies the horned one, as a horn is a well-known oriental emblem for the power or might. Kronos, the horned one, was, according to the mystic systems, just a synonym for the scriptural epithet applied to Nimrod, the mighty one. He began to be mighty on earth. His name Kronos, as the classical reader is aware, is applied to Saturn as the father of the gods. Hence the horned bull signified the mighty prince. It gets pretty crazy here, thereby pointing back to the first of those mighty ones who, under the name of Gubres, Garbars, and Calibri, occupied so conspicuous a place in the ancient world that, and to whom deified Assyrian monarchs covertly trace back the origin of their greatness and might. This explains the reason why Bacchus of the Greeks was represented as wearing horns, and why he was frequently addressed by the epithet bull-horned. Do you guys remember a couple episodes ago when we were talking about the First Crusade? This links into so much shit. This actually links into the episode on the First Crusade, the 2 episodes we did on the First Crusade. Now listen to this. The epithet bull-horned as one of the high titles of dignity, even compared of recently times Tarog Bahai, the leader of the Seljukian Turks who came from the neighborhood of the Euphrates, was in a similar manner represented with 3 horns growing out of his head as this emblem of this, sovereignty. This also, in a remarkable way, accounts for the origin of the divinities worshipped by our pagan Anglo-Saxon ancestors. Under the name of Zernbogus, this Zernbogus was the black, malevolent, ill-omened divinity. In other words, the exact counterpart, oh boy, of this popular idea of the devil. Is supposed to be black and equipped with horns and hooves. His name, analyzed, cast a very singular light on the source from whence has come the popular superstition in regard to the grand adversary. I'm going to skip through some of this stuff. It gets a little offensive for some of our more millennial listeners. We have both the prototype of the Anglo-Saxon Nebogus. Ooh, Nebogus. Nebogus. Remember, Hermes was named Nebu. The seed of the prophet Cush. And the real original of the black adversary of mankind, with horns and hoofs. It was a different character from that of the adversary that Nimrod was originally worshipped. It was inevitable that if worshipped at all, it must be generally be simply an object of fear. This is the idea that Cush was a black guy. That's really all that I wiped out of here. And so they're like, if the Anglo-Saxons were pale-skinned and if they worshipped this black-horned god, it would generally be simply an object of fear. And so Kronos, the horned one, who wore the horns as the emblem of both his physical might and his sovereign power, has come to be in popular superstition then recognized as the representative of the devil. Skipping ahead a little bit, there was another way in which Nimrod's power was symbolized besides the horn. A synonym of Gerber, the mighty one, was Abir, while Aber also signified wing. Nimrod, as head and captain of those men of war, which whom he surrounded himself and who were instruments of establishing his power, was Baal Abarine, lord of the mighty ones. But Baal Abarine signified the winged one. So there's a slight change in the spelling from the first Baal Abarin to Baal Abarine. Therefore, in symbol, he was represented not only as the horned bull, but as at once the horned and winged bull. Red Bull, it'll give you wings. As showing not merely that he was himself mighty, but that he had mighty ones under his command, who were ever ready to carry his will into effect and to put down all opposition to his power, and to shadow forth the vast expanse of his might, and he was represented with a great, wide, expanding wings. Cupid, the son of Venus, occupied as well, or as will afterwards be provided the mystic mythology, that very same position as Ninnius, the son, did to Rhea, the mother of the goddess, as Nimrod was unquestionably the first of the mighty ones after the flood. This statement, oh boy, Aristophanes, that the boy god Cupid himself, a winged one, produced all birds or winged ones while occupying the very position of Nin or Ninnius, the sun, shows that the respect also Ninnius or Nimrod are identified. While this is evident meaning of the poet, that also is a strictly historical point of view, that the conclusion of the historian Apollodorus, for he states that Ninnius is Nimrod, quote, Ninnius is Nimrod, unquote, and that and then in conformity with the identity of Ninnius and Nimrod, we find that one of the most celebrated sculptures of ancient Babylon, Ninnius and his wife Semiramis, represented as actively engaged in the pursuit of the chase, the quiver-bearing Semiramis being a fit companion for the mighty hunter before the Lord. Chapter 2, subsection, or sorry, retake, can I just rewind it? Chapter 2, Section 2, subsection 4, the death of the child. How Nimrod died, Scripture is entirely silent. Well, that is true, but you can find stuff in like the Book of Jasher and other other Hebrew traditions, Legend of the Jews by Ginsberg and so forth. If you go back to that Tower of Babel Nimrod episode, or if you go back to World War Z specifically, also there's two separate accounts of his death. Okay. How Nimrod died, Scripture is entirely silent. There was an ancient tradition that he came to a violent end. At least one. The circumstances of that end, however, as antiquity represents them, are clouded with fable. It is said that tempests of wind sent by God against the Tower of Babel overthrew it, and Nimrod perished in its ruins. This could not be true, for we have sufficient evidence that the Tower of Babel stood long after Nimrod's day. Then, in regards to the death of Ninnius, profane history speaks darkly and mysteriously. Through one account tells of his meeting with a violent death similar to Pentheus Lycurgus and Orpheus, who is said to have been torn into pieces. That this is the important part. The identity of Nimrod, however, and the Egyptian Osiris having been established, we have thereby light as to Nimrod's death. Osiris met with a violent end, and that violent death of Osiris was the central theme of the whole idolatry of Egypt. If Osiris was Nimrod, as we have seen, that violent death which the Egyptians so pathetically deplored in their annual festival. That's some good shade. He was just the death of Nimrod. The accounts in regard to the death of the god worshipped in the several mysteries of the different countries are all the same effect. The statement of Plato seems to show that in his day the Egyptian Osiris was regarded as identical to Tammuz. We have seen this as well. And Tammuz is well known to have been the same as Adonis. We have seen that as well. The famous huntsman, whose death Venus is fabled to have made such bitter lamentations. We have seen the lamentations of the women. As the women of Egypt wept for Osiris, and the Phoenicians and Assyrian women wept for Tammuz, so in Greece and in Rome the women wept for Bacchus, whose name we have seen means the bewailed or the lamented one. And now the connection with the Bacchanal lamentations, the importance of the relation between Nibiros, the spotted fawn, and Neberond, the mighty hunter, will appear. The Neberos, or the spotted fawn, was a symbol of Bacchus, representing Nebrond or Nimrod himself. Now, on certain occasions, the mystical celebrations, the Neberos, or the spotted fawn, was torn to pieces, expressly as we learn from Photius, as a commemoration of what happened to Bacchus, whom that fawn represented. That brings to mind also Dionysus, who was torn apart by a bunch of drunken witches. Oh. Tearing in pieces of Neberos, the spotted one, goes to confirm. Oh God, do you hear that? My wife went to a she went to a bridal shower, and she came home with a 5-week-old kitten. And the only way we can keep track of her is with this bell. So if you hear a bell in the background, that just means that her name is Ruby. Rubles is in studio, and I apologize for the tinkerbelling. Back to these lamentations, son. The tearing in pieces of Neberos, the spotted one, goes to confirm the conclusion that the death of Bacchus, even the death of Osiris, represented the death of Nimrod, whom, under the very name of Spotted One, the Babylonians worshipped, though we do not find any account of mysteries observed in Greece in memory of Orion. So they're bringing this thing up to Orion. I don't know if I missed it or if I skipped it, but the thing is they're saying that Nimrod is linked to Orion. Orion's the hunter with the 3 stars that represent the trinity in his belt, because Nimrod was the great hunter, which is Orion's spot in the zodiac, or not the zodiac, but in the constellations. You know what I'm saying, bro? The giant and mighty hunter celebrated by Homer under that name, yet he was represented symbolically as having died in a similar way to that which Osiris died, and as having then been translated to heaven, like Enoch was translated to heaven. I wonder if you guys can hear that bell. From the Persian records, we are expressly assured that it was Nimrod who was deified after his death by the name of Orion and placed among the stars. Here, then, we have large and consenting evidence, all leading to one conclusion, that the death of Nimrod, the child worshipped in the arms of the goddess mother of Babylon, was a death of violence. Now, when the mighty hero in the midst of his career of glory was suddenly cut off by a violent death, great seems to have been the shock and catastrophe occasioned. When the news spread abroad, the devotees of pleasure felt as the benefactor of mankind were gone, and the gaiety of nations eclipsed. Loud was the wail that everywhere ascended to heaven amongst the apostates from the primeval faith. For so desire a catastrophe, then began those weepings for Tammuz. in the guilt of which the daughters of Israel allowed themselves to be implicated, in the existence of which can be traced not merely to the annals of the classical antiquity, but to the literature of the world from Ultima Thule to Japan. It goes on to say, it is something, adds the author, like the bewailing of Adonis or the weeping for Tammuz mentioned in Scripture. Skip ahead a little bit. Throughout, see, this story links to everything. Literally, I did an episode about Ragnarok where we talk about this. Throughout Scandinavia, there were similar lamentations for the loss of the god Balder. Balder, through the treachery of the god Loki, the spirit of evil, according as had been written in the book of destiny, was slain throughout the empire of heaven, dependent on his life. His father Odin had learned the terrible secret from the book of destiny, having conjured one of the Volar from her infernal abode. All gods trembled at the knowledge of this event, and then Frigga, who was the wife of Odin, called on every object, animate and inanimate, to take an oath not to destroy or furnish arms against Balder. Fire, water, rocks, and vegetables were bound by this solemn obligation. One plant only, the mistletoe, was overlooked. Loki discovered this omission and made that contemptible shrub a fatal weapon. Among the warlike pastimes of Valhalla, one was to throw darts at the invulnerable deity, who felt a pleasure in presenting his charmed breast. Oh boy, everyone who has charmed breasts, everyone who has charmed breasts loves to present them. Who felt a pleasure in presenting his charmed breast to their weapons. At a tournament of this kind, the evil genius, putting a sprig of mistletoe onto the hands of the blind Hodor, and directing his aim, the dreaded prediction was accomplished by an unintentional fratricide. The spectators were struck with speechless wonder, and their misfortune was greater that no one, out of respect for the sacredness of the place, dared to avenge it. With tears of lamentation, they carried the lifeless body to the shore and laid it upon a ship as a funeral pyre. With that of Nana, his lovely bride, who had died of a broken heart, with Padme Amidala. His horse and his arms were burnt at the same time, is customary at the whatever of these ancient heroes of the North. Then Frigga, his mother, was overwhelmed with distress. Inconsolable for the loss of her beautiful son, she dispatched Hermod the Swift on the abode of Hela, the goddess of hell, or the infernal regions, to offer ransom for his release. The gloomy goddess promised that he should be restored, provided everything on earth were found to weep for him. Then were messengers sent over the whole world to see that the order was obeyed, and the affect of the general sorrow was as when they were a universal thaw. There was considerable variations of the original story in these legends, but the bottom essence of the story is the same, indicating that they must have flowed from one fountain. Now, it's funny because this Frigga stuff going to hell, and she didn't go to hell in this story, she dispatched Hermod to hell, but Frigga going to hell, or Hela, it echoes the story of Tammuz that we just did in Tammuz, the dying and rising god ? Episode. So that's been this episode, you guys. I hope you like it. Let me know what you think. There's going to be more of this. It's a huge book, and we're going to get through it. And it's just a reminder, it's called The Two Babylons, or The Papal Worship Proved to be the Worship of Nimrod and His Wife, published in 1916 by Alexander Hislop. I'm John. Please visit the website, stigmatastudios.com, or the app, or abracast.com. Social media links at the bottom. I'd like to know what you guys think about all this stuff. Please remember to go to iTunes. I encourage you all to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. Patreon. I have a Patreon thing that everyone is ignoring right now, so continue doing that. Enjoy the show. I'm glad you guys like it. Let me know what you think. And this is going to be Soda Jerk with a song called Fuck and Fight. After this, thanks for listening. See you in a few days. Woo!
Vienna, 1683. Today is September 11th, 1683. The mighty army of the Ottoman Empire, led by the savage and radical terror troops of the Dar al-Harb, surround the walled city of Vienna and begin a siege to break the golden apple of Europe and kill, enslave, or convert all of its inhabitants. The valiant citizens stand against the tyrannical army with the steadfast leadership of Count Ernst Rudiger von Stromberg, the help of the ever-living rebel Cyrus the Dead Guy, and the hopes of the faraway King Jan Sobieski III and his army of flying hussars. The Vienna 1683 comic is available right now from Stigmata Studios at stigmatastudios.com and on indieplanet.us. The Non-Standard Squad, 1944. World War II. 3 weird American soldiers are on a search and rescue mission into the oldest and darkest regions of Europe. A cursed, ever-living warrior, Cyrus the Dead Guy. An experimental warbot, Sergeant Lane McCord. An all-red axe, mysterious rogue with a demon-possessed arm, come face to face with an army of magically corrupted machine-obsessed elves, a magic hammer-wielding Norse Ubermensch, and a Nazi wizard who is a member of the ancient Dark Order of the Shining Hexagon. The Non-Standard Squad 1944 comic is available right now from Stigmata Studios at stigmatastudios.com and on indieplanet.us.
And my darling whiskey, she tightened up her grip, and she made me sick that night. I knew that the whiskey would take up my life. Well, I stand a full 2 inches below 5'9", and every guy here wants to take me alive. So I'll take a shot of whiskey and punch out their lights. The whiskey, it make me wanna fucking fight. I fucking fight, fucking fight. The whiskey, it make me wanna fucking fight. Not even the crack of dawn is safe. So I took a shot of whiskey and say goodnight. The whiskey, it makes me wanna fucking fight. I fucking